The ceramic shards stung my cheek, tiny white crescents embedding themselves in my skin. He stood over me, spittle flying as he screamed, but all I could hear was the high-pitched ringing in my ears. They had finally broken me, or so they thought. I just closed my eyes, picturing their downfall, feeling the cold tile against my back as the plan began to solidify, crystallizing into something sharp and inevitable. If you've ever been betrayed by your own family, if your own mother turned against you, then subscribe now for more shocking stories of family secrets and ultimate revenge. New Year's Eve had always been sacred, a time for family, for forgiveness, and for looking forward to a brighter future. This year, I desperately needed that brighter future. After a difficult divorce, I was struggling to make ends meet, raising my 9-year-old son, Alex, on my own. Money was tight, but I was determined to give him a good life. My mother, Carol, had always been complicated. She loved to play the role of the generous matriarch, but it always came with strings attached, a constant reminder of how much I owed her. Still, family was family, and I swallowed my pride, accepting her invitation to New Year's Eve dinner. I even let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. That she would see how hard I was trying, how much I was sacrificing for Alex, and offer a little genuine support. I should have known better. The evening started pleasantly enough. The aroma of roasted turkey filled the air, and Alex was excited to see his cousins. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax, to believe that everything would be okay. We sat down at the long, polished dining table laden with food. My brother Mark was there with his wife, Susan, and their 2 children. My father, a quiet, unassuming man, sat at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on his plate. The atmosphere was deceptively peaceful. My name is Tiffany, and I should have seen the storm coming, but I was too busy trying to keep the peace, to make sure Alex felt loved and secure. It started subtly, with Carol's passive-aggressive comments about my lifestyle choices, a thinly veiled jab at my divorce and my financial struggles. I ignored them, focusing on Alex, engaging him in conversation about his school and his friends. But Carol wouldn't let it go. Her voice grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the entire room. The unthinkable happened. In a moment that will forever be seared into my memory, my mother stood up, grabbed a serving bowl of mashed potatoes, and dumped it directly onto Alex's head. The white, steaming mass cascaded down his face, covering his hair and clothes. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. I froze, unable to comprehend what was happening. Before I could react, Carol pointed towards the door and screamed, "Get out! Get out of my house! You're a disgrace to this family!" My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to scream to defend my son, but I knew it would only escalate the situation. Instead, I calmly wiped the potatoes from Alex's face, grabbed his hand, and walked towards the door. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I simply said, "Okay." I would later realize that that single word, that quiet act of defiance, was the spark that ignited the inferno of my revenge. As we stepped out into the cold night air, Alex shivering beside me, I made a silent vow. They would pay for this. They would all pay. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had won. But they had underestimated the depth of my love for my son and the lengths I would go to protect him. The person I trusted most, my own mother, was now my enemy. The drive home was a blur. Alex sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his small body trembling. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him that everything would be all right, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? How could I explain the inexplicable cruelty of his own grandmother? That night, sleep evaded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of Alex's face covered in mashed potatoes, his innocent eyes filled with confusion and pain. The ringing in my ears was back, louder this time, a constant reminder of the humiliation we had endured. I tossed and turned, replaying the scene in my head, searching for answers, for some semblance of understanding, but there was none. Carol's actions were irrational, malicious, and unforgivable. The next morning I woke up exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Alex was quiet, withdrawn. He picked at his breakfast, avoiding eye contact. I knew I had to do something, anything, to make him feel safe and loved again. I called my mother. I told myself I was doing it for Alex, that maybe, just maybe, I could reason with her, get her to apologize. The conversation started calmly enough. I tried to explain how much her actions had hurt Alex, how deeply they had affected him. But Carol was unrepentant. She accused me of being dramatic, of exaggerating the situation. She said Alex was spoiled and needed to be taught a lesson. Her words were like knives, twisting in my heart. I tried to remain calm, to reason with her, but it was no use. She was determined to see herself as the victim, to paint me as the villain. Finally, I lost my temper. I screamed, I cursed, I said things I later regretted. But in that moment, I couldn't control my rage. The phone slammed down, severing the connection, leaving me trembling and defeated. I had failed. I had tried to fix things, to bridge the gap, but it was impossible. Carol was beyond reason, lost in her own distorted reality. The following weeks were a nightmare. The financial strain intensified. My already meager savings dwindled as I struggled to pay the bills. The divorce had left me with nothing, and Carol's constant reminders of my dependence on her were now a cruel mockery. I applied for every job I could find, but the competition was fierce, and my lack of recent experience was a major disadvantage. Desperation gnawed at me. I started having panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night gasping for air. The weight of my responsibilities, the fear of failure was crushing me, and through it all, the image of Alex's face, covered in mashed potatoes, haunted me. I reached out to my brother, Mark, hoping for some support, some understanding. But he was firmly on Carol's side. He accused me of disrespecting our mother, of causing unnecessary drama. He said I needed to apologize to make amends. I tried to explain Carol's cruelty, her irrational behavior, but he refused to listen. He was blinded by his loyalty to her, unable to see the truth. I felt utterly alone, isolated from my own family, abandoned in my time of need. One evening, as I was putting Alex to bed, he turned to me, his eyes filled with sadness. "Mommy," he said, "why doesn't Grandma love me?" The question pierced my heart like a shard of glass. How could I explain the complexities of family dynamics, the poisonous nature of Carol's love, to a 9-year-old child? I held him close, stroking his hair, whispering words of comfort. "Of course, Grandma loves you, sweetie," I lied. "Sometimes adults just make mistakes. It doesn't mean they don't love you." But even as I spoke the words, I knew they were hollow, meaningless. The truth was, I didn't know why Carol didn't love Alex. And I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for the pain she had caused him. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. They had power, they had money, they had each other. And I had nothing but my love for my son and a burning desire for revenge. That night, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like an eternity, the darkness pressing down on me like a physical weight. Every mistake, every failure, every moment of weakness replayed in my mind, each one a fresh wave of agony. The shame was almost unbearable. They had not only humiliated me but had also managed to poison my relationship with my son. I was failing him and I didn't know how to stop it. The stress took its toll. One morning I woke up unable to move. My body was heavy, leaden. Exhaustion had finally won. I called in sick to work, knowing that missing even a single day would push me further into the abyss, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed. Alex brought me a glass of water and a piece of toast, his small face etched with concern. "Mommy, are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I forced a smile, trying to reassure him, but the effort was too much. Tears welled up in my eyes and I turned away, ashamed of my weakness. He didn't deserve to see me like this, broken and helpless. The following days were a blur of fevered dreams and despair. I lost track of time, barely eating, barely sleeping. The apartment felt like a prison, the walls closing in on me. I was trapped, suffocating under the weight of my own failures. The phone rang incessantly, but I ignored it. I didn't want to talk to anyone, to explain my situation, to beg for help. I was convinced that no one cared, that I was alone in this struggle. One afternoon, I found myself staring at a bottle of pills. The idea flickered in my mind, a tempting escape from the pain. Just a few pills, and it would all be over. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. I picked up the bottle, my hand trembling. But then I saw Alex's face, his innocent eyes filled with love and trust. The image jolted me back to reality. I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave him. He was the only thing that mattered, the only reason I had to keep fighting. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of clarity. The fever had broken, and my mind felt sharper, more focused. The despair hadn't completely vanished, but it had receded, replaced by a cold, hard determination. I looked at myself in the mirror and I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were hollow, her face gaunt, but there was a flicker of steel in her gaze. I was done feeling sorry for myself. I was done being a victim. It was time to take control, to fight back. I started small. I forced myself to get out of bed, to shower, to eat a proper meal. I cleaned the apartment, throwing out the remnants of my despair, the empty takeout containers, the crumpled tissues. I made a list of everything I needed to do, every obstacle I needed to overcome. I started applying for jobs again, this time with renewed vigor. I practiced my interview skills, researching potential employers, preparing myself for every question they might ask. I reached out to old colleagues, networking, seeking advice and support. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild my life. I also started researching my mother and brother, not in a casual way. I became obsessed, compiling information, digging into their past, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability. I discovered hidden debts, secret affairs, shady business dealings. The more I learned, the angrier I became. They had built their lives on lies and deceit, and they had gotten away with it for far too long. It was time for them to pay the price. I stopped crying. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. The rage consumed me, fueling my determination, hardening my resolve. I would not rest until they had suffered as I had suffered, until they had lost everything they held dear. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could get away with anything. But they were wrong. I was coming for them, and I wouldn't stop until justice was served. My weakness had been their greatest strength, but now my rage would be their downfall. The plan began to take shape, forming in my mind like a dark and intricate puzzle. Every piece had to be perfect, every detail meticulously planned. I would be patient, methodical, and ruthless. I would use their own secrets against them, exposing their lies, destroying their reputations. They had broken me, humiliated me, and abandoned me. Now it was my turn. I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every phone call, every email. I installed a hidden camera in Alex's room, disguised as a teddy bear, pointed directly at the area where he played. I needed proof. Proof of Carol's behavior, proof of Mark's complicity, proof of their cruelty towards my son. It felt invasive, a violation of Alex's privacy, but I convinced myself it was necessary. It was the only way to protect him, to expose the truth. I knew the laws intimately, the rules about evidence, about privacy, about what was admissible in court. I spent hours researching, consulting with a lawyer, making sure I was on solid legal ground. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The first few weeks were uneventful. Carol and Mark kept their distance, perhaps sensing my change in demeanor. But I knew it wouldn't last. Their arrogance was their weakness, their belief that they could control me, manipulate me, that I would always be the pushover they had always known. I played the part, acting contrite, apologizing for my outburst on New Year's Eve. I even sent Carol a bouquet of flowers, a gesture of goodwill. She ate it up, of course, basking in the perceived victory. I could almost hear her cackling with glee, convinced that she had broken my spirit. She had no idea what was coming. One afternoon, Carol called, inviting Alex over for a visit. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to refuse. But I knew I couldn't. It would arouse suspicion, derail my plan. Besides, I needed to document their interactions, to gather more evidence. I agreed, reluctantly, but only after installing a second hidden camera, this one disguised as a button on Alex's jacket. I watched the live feed on my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Carol greeted Alex with a saccharine smile, showering him with fake affection. She offered him cookies and juice, praising his intelligence, his good looks. It was all an act, of course, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to impress him, to win him over. But Alex seemed oblivious, lapping up the attention, eager to please his grandmother. Then the conversation took a dark turn. Carol started asking Alex about me, about my financial situation, about my lifestyle. She subtly planted seeds of doubt in his mind, suggesting that I was irresponsible, that I didn't care about him. She even implied that I was to blame for the divorce, painting his father as the victim, me as the villain. I watched in horror as Alex's face clouded over, his innocent eyes filled with confusion. I wanted to intervene, to snatch him away from her poisonous influence, but I couldn't. I had to stay put, to document everything. Later that evening, when Alex returned home, he was quiet, withdrawn. He avoided eye contact, and when I asked him what was wrong, he shrugged and mumbled, "Nothing." But I knew something was amiss. Carol had poisoned his mind, planted seeds of doubt that would be difficult to eradicate. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the footage of Carol's manipulative tactics over and over again, my rage building with each viewing. I knew I had to act fast before she could do any more damage. I decided to accelerate my plan, to move up the timeline. I had enough evidence, enough ammunition. It was time to strike. The next day, I contacted a forensic accountant. I needed someone to help me decipher Carol and Mark's financial records, to uncover their hidden assets, their shady dealings. I knew they were hiding something, and I was determined to find it. The accountant was initially reluctant, citing client confidentiality, but I convinced him that I had evidence of illegal activity, that I was acting in the public interest. I showed him snippets of my recordings, hinting at the extent of Carol and Mark's corruption. He agreed to help, albeit discreetly. Over the next few weeks, the accountant worked tirelessly, poring over bank statements, tax returns, and property records. He uncovered a web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and fraudulent transactions. Carol and Mark had been systematically defrauding their business partners, evading taxes, and laundering money for years. The evidence was damning, irrefutable. I felt a surge of satisfaction, a sense of vindication. Their carefully constructed empire was about to crumble. I also started documenting Mark's infidelities. He had been having an affair with his secretary for years, a fact that was well known within the family, but never spoken aloud. I hired a private investigator to gather evidence, to obtain photographs and recordings of their illicit encounters. I knew that exposing his affair would not only humiliate him, but also damage his reputation, potentially affecting his business dealings. I wanted to inflict maximum damage, to tear their lives apart piece by piece. I smiled, a genuine smile, the first in a long time. They thought they were safe, untouchable. But I was watching, I was recording, and I was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The feeling of anticipation was intoxicating. I knew that the fallout would be explosive, that their lives would be forever changed. And I couldn't wait to watch it all unfold. My weakness had been their greatest weapon, but now my cunning would be their downfall. The clock was ticking. The game had begun. The accountant called me late one night, his voice hushed and urgent. He'd found it, the smoking gun. Carol had been siphoning money from the family business for years, diverting funds into a network of secret accounts controlled by Mark. It wasn't just a few $1,000s here and there, it was millions. Enough to send them both away for a very long time. He also discovered evidence that Mark had been using company funds to pay for his mistress's lavish lifestyle, expensive cars, luxury apartments, and extravagant vacations. The perfect leverage. My hands trembled as I listened, a wave of adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. "Are you absolutely sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Positive," he replied. "I have all the documentation, it's all here." He sounded almost scared. I thanked him profusely, promising him anonymity and protection. Then I hung up the phone and stared out the window, the city lights blurring through my tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of triumph. The end was near. They had played their game for far too long. Now it was my turn to deal the final blow. I decided to set the trap, a meticulously planned confrontation designed to expose their lies and deceit. I invited Carol and Mark to dinner at a high-end restaurant, one they frequented, a place where they felt comfortable and secure. I chose the date carefully, a day when I knew their business partners and closest friends would be present. I wanted an audience. I wanted maximum humiliation. I booked a private room, ensuring that our conversation would be both intimate and inescapable. I hired a professional audiovisual company to install hidden cameras and microphones, disguised as artwork and decorative fixtures. I wanted to capture every word, every gesture, every incriminating detail. I knew they would be suspicious, that they would sense something was amiss. But their arrogance, their belief in their own invincibility, would blind them to the danger. They would walk right into my trap, oblivious to the consequences. As the day of the dinner approached, my anxiety grew, but I pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. I rehearsed my lines, visualizing the confrontation, anticipating their reactions. I knew they would deny everything, that they would try to gaslight me, to manipulate me. But I was prepared. I had the evidence, the proof, the unwavering determination to expose them for who they truly were. That evening, as I got dressed for dinner, I felt a strange sense of calm. I chose a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I applied my makeup carefully, concealing the dark circles under my eyes, the telltale signs of sleepless nights. I wanted to appear confident, composed, in control. I arrived at the restaurant early, greeting the staff with a warm smile, ensuring that everything was in place. The private room was perfect, elegantly decorated, subtly bugged. The cameras were hidden, the microphones were live, the stage was set. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. Soon Carol and Mark arrived, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They greeted me with forced smiles, their eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of trouble. "What's all this then?" Carol asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Just a family dinner," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "I thought it was time we had a proper conversation." Mark chuckled nervously. "A conversation. About what exactly?" I smiled, a cold, hard smile that sent a chill down their spines. "About everything," I said. "About the lies, the deceit, the betrayal." The color drained from their faces. They knew that I knew. As the evening progressed, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. We exchanged pleasantries, made small talk, but the undercurrent of animosity was palpable. I could see the fear in their eyes, the desperation to maintain control. But it was too late. The trap had been sprung. After the main course, I stood up, raising my glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, my voice ringing clear and true. Carol and Mark exchanged nervous glances, their hands trembling. "To family," I continued, my eyes fixed on Carol. "To the bonds that should unite us but instead tear us apart." I paused, letting my words sink in. "To the secrets we keep, the lies we tell, and the damage we inflict on those we claim to love." I took a sip of my wine, savoring the moment. Then I looked at Mark. "And to the mistresses," I added, a hint of sarcasm in my voice. "May they always be worth the money." Mark choked on his wine, his face turning crimson. Carol gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. The game was over. I reached into my purse and pulled out a USB drive. "I have something I want to share with you," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "A little compilation of your greatest hits." I walked over to the audio-visual system and plugged in the drive. On the screen, images of Carol's secret bank accounts appeared, followed by recordings of her conversations with Mark, plotting their schemes. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Carol and Mark's ragged breathing. They were trapped, exposed, and utterly defenseless, and I was just getting started. The screen went black, and then the video began. The video started with Carol berating Alex, the hidden camera footage from his bedroom playing out on the big screen. Her sweet grandma act was gone, replaced by a venomous stream of insults and criticism. "You're just like your mother, a failure," she sneered at the screen, her words echoing in the private dining room. Then came the recordings from Alex's jacket button, Carol poisoning his mind against me, planting seeds of doubt and resentment. Mark sat frozen, his face a mask of horror as he watched his mother's cruelty unfold. The next video showed Mark with his mistress, entering hotels, sharing intimate dinners, the evidence of his infidelity undeniable. The pictures were high resolution, impossible to dismiss as innocent. His face, contorted in passion, was broadcast for all to see. A collective gasp swept through the room as the final piece of evidence appeared. The accountant's report, detailing the millions Carol had siphoned from the family business, the network of offshore accounts, the fraudulent transactions, it was all there, laid bare for everyone to see. The silence in the room was deafening. Carol's face crumbled, her carefully constructed facade of sophistication and respectability shattered. Mark stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, his career and reputation in ruins. Friends, business partners, even distant relatives, all watched in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, disgust, and morbid curiosity. Carol finally found her voice, a desperate, trembling whisper. "This is a lie," she gasped, her eyes darting around the room, pleading for someone to believe her. "It's all fabricated, a malicious attempt to destroy us." But no one moved, no one spoke. The evidence was too overwhelming, too damning. Mark tried to salvage the situation, attempting to spin the affair as a momentary lapse in judgment. But his words rang hollow, drowned out by the weight of his deceit. The mood had shifted. The air was thick with betrayal. The guests began to murmur amongst themselves, whispering accusations and judgments. One by one, they started to leave, unable to stomach the toxic atmosphere. The room emptied quickly, leaving only Carol, Mark, and me. Carol lunged at me, her eyes filled with rage, her nails bared like claws. "You witch," she screamed, spitting venomous words. "You've ruined everything." But I stood my ground, unflinching, meeting her gaze with cold satisfaction. "No, Carol," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You ruined everything. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." Mark tried to intervene, pulling Carol away, begging her to stop. But it was too late, the damage was done. The police arrived soon after, summoned by one of the departing guests. Carol and Mark were taken into custody, facing charges of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. Their carefully constructed empire had crumbled, reduced to ashes in a single night. The fallout was swift and brutal. The news of their crimes spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and social media feeds. Their business partners severed ties, their friends abandoned them, their reputation was permanently tarnished. The family business was seized by the authorities, their assets frozen, their lavish lifestyle came to an abrupt end. Mark's mistress disappeared, leaving him to face the consequences alone. Alex, thankfully, was shielded from the worst of it, his father's family now disgraced. I made sure he understood that none of this was his fault, that he was loved and protected. It was a long and difficult process, but he slowly began to heal, to trust again. I watched them lose everything: their freedom, their wealth, their reputation, their family, and I felt nothing. No joy, no triumph, no sense of closure. Only a hollow emptiness. The years of planning, the meticulous execution, the devastating outcome, all seemed meaningless in the face of the pain and suffering they had inflicted on me and my son. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring me happiness. It didn't erase the scars. I moved on with my life, focusing on my son, my career, and my own healing. I never spoke to Carol or Mark again. They became ghosts, banished from my world. I found peace not in revenge but in forgiveness, in letting go of the anger and resentment that had consumed me for so long. They lost everything, I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. It's a course correction when the world tilts too far off its axis. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.